Every night my wife went into our son's room, telling me she was checking his vitals. She said she was the only one who could keep him alive. But one day I installed a hidden camera, and I witnessed things I never thought possible. I did not see a mother caring for a sick child. I saw a monster executing a $5 million death sentence. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to protect a loved one from the person they trusted most. It was exactly 2:14 in the morning when the thirst woke me up. At 70 years old, sleep does not come as easily as it used to, and when it breaks, it leaves you with a dry mouth and a racing mind. I slid out of bed trying not to disturb Cynthia, but her side of the bed was already empty. The sheets were cold. She was likely in Leo's room again. For the past 18 months, that had been her routine. The devoted stepmother tirelessly caring for my 19-year-old son, who was withering away before our eyes. I walked down the hallway of our sprawling estate in Connecticut. The house was silent except for the rhythmic mechanical hissing coming from Leo's room. I stopped at his door, which was slightly ajar. The soft glow of the medical monitors spilled into the hallway, casting long shadows. I intended to walk past to get my water, but a movement inside stopped me. Cynthia was standing over the hospital bed we had installed. We had turned my son's bedroom into a high-level intensive care unit at a personal cost of $2 million. Ventilators, dialysis machines, monitors for every vital sign imaginable. In the center of all that machinery lay Leo, my son, the boy who just 2 years ago had been the captain of his university swim team. A young man who stood 6 feet tall and weighed a healthy 180 pounds. Now he looked like a skeleton wrapped in translucent skin, barely 90 pounds soaking wet. I watched as Cynthia pulled a syringe from her pocket. It was not one of the prepackaged medications the home health nurses used during the day. This one was unmarked, filled with a cloudy yellow liquid. She did not check the charts. She did not wash her hands. She simply injected the substance directly into his IV port. Leo stirred. Even in his medically induced haze, he felt it. A low, guttural moan escaped his cracked lips. It was the sound of an animal in a trap. "Mom," he rasped, his voice barely a whisper. "It hurts. Please, it burns." My heart hammered against my ribs. I expected Cynthia to soothe him, to adjust the drip, to wipe his forehead with a cool cloth, as she always did when I was in the room. Instead, she leaned in close, her face inches from his. "Pain means the medicine is working," she whispered. Her voice was not warm. It was ice. It was the sharp edge of a scalpel. "If you are not a good boy, if you keep complaining, I will pull the breathing tube out. Do you want to suffocate, Leo? Do you want to die alone in the dark?" I froze in the hallway, my hand gripping the doorframe so hard my knuckles turned white. This was not care. This was torture. I watched my son, a 19-year-old man reduced to a terrified infant, squeeze his eyes shut and let a single tear roll down his sunken cheek. He stopped complaining. He accepted the pain because he believed she was his lifeline. I wanted to burst in there. I wanted to tear her away from him. But 40 years as an urban planner had taught me that impulsive actions lead to structural collapse. If I confronted her now without proof, she would spin it. She was a former nurse. She knew the medical jargon. She would tell me I was senile, that I did not understand the complexity of his rare immune disorder. She would say it was a necessary treatment. I backed away silently. I went back to my room and stared at the ceiling until dawn, my mind racing. I needed to know what she was putting in his veins. The next morning, the sun streamed into the kitchen, mocking the darkness I felt inside. Cynthia was at the stove making an omelet, humming a tune. She looked fresh, rested, the picture of a loving wife. "Harrison, darling," she said as I poured my coffee. "You look terrible. Did you not sleep well?" I stared at her, fighting the urge to scream. "Just old age, I suppose," I muttered. "How is Leo?" She sighed, a perfect performance of maternal worry. "He had a rough night. His fever spiked again." I had to administer an extra dose of the experimental blockers Dr. Vance prescribed. It is heartbreaking to watch him suffer, but we have to trust the process. Trust the process. That was her mantra. Trust Dr. Vance, the private specialist she had hired who charged us $50,000 a month for concierge care. Suddenly, a high-pitched alarm screamed from down the hall. It was the cardiac monitor in Leo's room. We both ran. I got there first. Leo was convulsing on the bed. His body arched unnaturally. His eyes rolled back in his head, white foam gathering at the corners of his mouth. The machines were flashing red. I grabbed my phone and started dialing 911. My fingers were shaking. "We need an ambulance," I shouted. Cynthia lunged at me. She did not just try to stop me, she physically snatched the phone from my hand with a strength that shocked me. "No," she screamed. "Are you crazy, Harrison? Give me the phone, Cynthia," I roared. "He is dying. He is not dying. He is stabilizing," she yelled back, pressing the cancel button on the call. "If you call an ambulance, they will take him to a public emergency room. They do not know his protocol. They do not have his charts. They will give him standard interaction drugs, and it will kill him instantly. Do you want to kill your son, Harrison?" She was using my fear against me. She was weaponizing my ignorance. "Dr. Vance said this might happen," she continued, her voice dropping to a frantic whisper as she checked the monitors. "It is a reaction to the new therapy. If we move him now, we breach the sterile environment. We void the treatment protocol. He will die in the ambulance, and it will be your fault." I looked at my son. The convulsions were slowing down, but he looked gray, lifeless. I looked at Cynthia, who was expertly adjusting valves and silencing alarms. She looked in control. I felt old, useless, a 70-year-old man who knew how to design cities but knew nothing about the chemistry of the human body. "Fine," I said, my voice trembling. "Call Vance. Get him here now." "I already texted him," she said, turning her back to me. "Go to the kitchen, Harrison. Get out of the way. You are making the stress levels in the room rise, and that is bad for Leo's heart." She kicked me out. She kicked me out of my own son's room. I walked to the kitchen, my hands trembling with a mix of adrenaline and rage. I felt like a coward. I had let her win because I was terrified she might be right. What if I was wrong? What if my interference actually killed him? I went to the sink to wash my face and try to think. That was when I saw it. The medical waste bin under the sink. Usually Cynthia was meticulous about sealing the biohazard bags and having them picked up by a service. But in the chaos of the morning and her rush to stop me from calling 911, she had been careless. The lid was slightly open. Right on top, sitting on a pile of coffee grounds, was a glass vial. It was empty. I reached in and picked it up. It was cold. The label had been scratched off with a fingernail, but not completely. I squinted, adjusting my glasses. I could make out 3 letters printed in bold red ink near the bottom rim. K-CL. I am not a doctor, but I am a man who reads. I watch the news. I know what chemicals are used in lethal injections. KCl stands for potassium chloride. In small doses, it treats mineral deficiency. In large concentrated doses pushed rapidly into an IV line, it stops the human heart. My blood ran cold. The room spun. The yellow liquid I saw last night. The convulsions this morning. She was not treating him. She was stopping his heart and then restarting it, just to keep him on the edge of death. Why? The answer hit me with the force of a freight train. The trust fund. Leo's grandfather, my father, had left him a trust fund of $15 million. It was set to transfer to his full control on his 21st birthday. Leo was 19. If he died before 21, the money reverted to me. And if I died or if I was declared incompetent, Cynthia, as my wife, would control everything. But there was a catch. If Leo was declared permanently incapacitated before 21, a clause in the trust allowed his legal guardian to access the principal amount for his care. She did not want him dead. Not yet. She wanted him invalid. She wanted him broken. She needed him to be a vegetable so she could milk $15 million for the rest of her life. I looked at the vial in my hand. This was not paranoia. This was evidence, but it was just a piece of glass in a trash can. She could claim I planted it. She could claim it was for something else. I needed more. I needed to see her do it. I needed to hear her say it. I wrapped the vial in a paper towel and shoved it deep into my pocket. I took a deep breath and composed my face. When I turned around, I was no longer the scared, confused old man she thought she could manipulate. I was the architect who was about to design her prison. I walked back into the living room. Cynthia came out of Leo's room, wiping her hands on a towel. "He is stable," she said. "That was close, Harrison. You need to trust me. You almost caused a disaster." I looked her in the eye and lied with the smoothness of a politician. "You are right, Cynthia," I said, my voice breaking just enough to sound defeated. "I am sorry. I panicked. I am just an old man, and I cannot stand seeing him like this. I think I need to go away for a few days. I have that property sale in Chicago. Maybe I should go close the deal. It is worth $8 million. We might need the liquid cash if his treatments are going to get more expensive." I saw the greed flash in her eyes, instantly replacing the fake concern. "8 million, she asked. "Yes. You should go. You cannot help here anyway. I will take care of Leo. Go make the money, Harrison. We will need it." She took the bait. She thought she was sending the clueless husband away to fetch more money for her to steal. She had no idea that I was not going to Chicago. I was going to the hotel across the street to watch her destroy herself. The game had begun, and she had no idea who she was playing against. I packed my suitcase with the slow, deliberate movements of a man defeated by life. That was the performance Cynthia needed to see. I told her the property deal in Chicago had complications, and I had to fly to New York immediately to liquidate a significant portion of my stock portfolio to keep the company afloat. I painted a picture of financial desperation. I told her we might lose the summer house. I told her cash flow was non-existent. I needed her to believe that I was distracted by money so she would feel safe enough to be careless. She played her part perfectly. She furrowed her brow and held my hand and told me not to worry about anything here. She said she would take care of everything. She said she would be the rock this family needed. It was a brilliant performance. If I did not know she was poisoning my son, I might have believed she actually loved me. Before I left, I had one final task. I told her I wanted to say goodbye to Leo. I went into his room and asked for a moment alone with my son. He was sleeping a deep, unnatural sleep induced by whatever cocktail she had given him earlier. While he slept, I went to the expensive medical-grade air purifier in the corner of the room. It was a large unit perfectly positioned to cover the entire bed. I popped the front panel off to check the filter. In less than 30 seconds, I had secured a 4K micro camera behind the intake vent. It was wired directly into the unit's power supply, so it would never run out of battery. It was invisible unless you took the machine apart with a screwdriver. I also slipped a high-powered listening device under the passenger seat of Cynthia's Range Rover and another camera on the bookshelf in the living room, disguised as a spine of an old encyclopedia. I walked out of the house and got into a taxi. I did not go to the airport. I went to the extended stay hotel 3 miles down the road. I had rented a room on the top floor, paying cash. I set up my command center, 3 laptops, 2 iPads, a pot of black coffee. I watched my own house through the digital window. The sun went down. The lights came on. At 8:30 in the evening, a black BMW pulled into my driveway. I knew that car. It belonged to Dr. Vance. He did not knock, he used a key. My wife opened the door wearing a silk robe I had bought her for our anniversary. She did not greet him like a doctor. She greeted him like a lover. I sat in the dark hotel room and watched my wife pour my vintage scotch for the man who was helping her kill my son. They sat in the living room laughing. I turned up the volume on my headphones. They were not talking about medicine. They were talking about real estate in the Cayman Islands. They were talking about how much my life insurance policy would pay out if the stress of Leo dying caused me to have a stroke. Then came the sound that made my blood freeze. From Leo's room, the cardiac monitor began to beep. It was a rhythmic, high-pitched sound indicating his heart rate was elevating. He was waking up. On the screen, I saw Cynthia sigh with annoyance. She put down her drink and marched into Leo's room. She did not check his pulse. She did not look at his eyes. She walked over to the monitor and simply flipped the power switch. The beeping stopped. "He is so loud," she complained, walking back to the living room. "That noise ruins the mood." She turned off the machine that told us if my son was alive or dead because it annoyed her boyfriend. I stared at the screen showing Leo's room. The silence was terrifying. Leo was moving. His hand twitched. Then his head turned. He was awake. I zoomed in. His lips were cracked and dry. He tried to sit up, but his muscles had atrophied so much he could barely lift his head. He looked at the empty chair where I usually sat. "Dad," he whispered. I leaned into my laptop screen, tears streaming down my face. "I am here, son," I whispered back to the cold glass. "I am here." He tried again. "Water. Mom. Water." He managed to push himself to the edge of the bed. His legs, which used to power him through lap after lap in the university pool, dangled uselessly. He slid off the mattress. He hit the floor with a dull thud. He did not have the strength to stand. He began to crawl. My son was crawling across the floor of his own bedroom, dragging his body by his elbows like a wounded soldier. He was heading for the door. He was heading for help. He reached the doorframe. "Mom," he called out. It was louder this time. "Please. I am thirsty." In the living room, Cynthia rolled her eyes. She stood up and walked to the hallway. She stood in the doorway of Leo's room, looking down at him with pure contempt. "What are you doing on the floor, Leo?" she asked, cold and sharp. "Water," he begged. "Please." "You are making a mess," she said. "You are supposed to be sleeping. If you cannot stay in bed, you do not get water." She grabbed the door handle. "No," Leo cried, reaching out a trembling hand. "No, please do not close it." "Good night, Leo," she said. She slammed the door. I watched my son collapse on the rug, sobbing dry, tearless sobs. He lay there in the dark, alone, terrified and thirsty, while his stepmother went back to finish her drink with her lover. I opened the drawer of the hotel nightstand. Inside was my old service revolver. I had brought it with me. I took it out. The steel was cold and heavy in my hand. It was loaded. I stood up. I could be there in 5 minutes. I could kick down the door. I could put a bullet in Vance's head, and then I could turn the gun on Cynthia. It would be easy. It would be justice. Every fiber of my being screamed for violence. I imagined the look on her face. I imagined saving my son right now. I walked to the hotel room door, my hand on the latch. But then I stopped. I looked back at the screen. Leo had stopped crying. He had passed out on the rug from exhaustion. If I went in there now with a gun, I would go to prison for the rest of my life. Cynthia might survive. She might spin a story that I had a psychotic break. She would control the narrative. She would control the money. And Leo would be left alone in the system, or worse, left in her care, if she survived. I needed more than vengeance. I needed a total victory. I needed to destroy her completely. I needed to strip her of her freedom, her reputation, and every penny she had ever stolen. I needed to make sure she could never hurt anyone ever again. I put the gun back in the drawer. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. I sat back down in the chair, my hands shaking so badly I spilled coffee on the desk. I forced myself to watch. I forced myself to witness every second of their cruelty so I would never forget why I had to be ruthless. Hours passed. Vance stood up to leave around 3 in the morning. They stood by the front door. The camera in the living room picked up their audio clearly. How much longer? Vance asked, buttoning his coat. I have debts, Cynthia. The investors are getting impatient. Cynthia checked her nails. Soon, she said. The brat turns 20 next month. That means we have less than a year before the trust fund matures and he gets full control. We cannot let him reach 21. She looked Vance in the eye and smiled a smile that was pure evil. We have to speed up the timeline, she said. Did you bring the new batch? Vance nodded. It is double concentration, he said. Arsenic is tricky, Cynthia. If you give him too much too fast, the medical examiner will see it immediately. It has to look like organ failure from the disease. I know how to do my job, she snapped. Just get me the supply. I will make sure he does not see 21. Has the dose for today been doubled? Vance nodded. Good, she said. Then go home. I have a grieving widow role to practice. I stopped the recording. I saved the file to 3 different hard drives and uploaded it to a secure cloud server. My son was being poisoned with arsenic. They were accelerating the schedule. They were planning to kill him within the year. I looked at the calendar. I did not have a year. I did not even have a month. I had days. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I had not called in years. It was 3:30 in the morning, but I knew she would answer. Harriet, I said when my lawyer picked up. Wake up. I need you to open a file. We are going to war. I sat in that hotel room as the sun began to rise over the city skyline. The light hit the glass buildings, but it brought no warmth to me. My world had become cold and gray. I had the evidence of the conversation, but I needed the science. I needed to know exactly what was flowing through my son's veins. I called a private courier service, the kind that handles sensitive legal documents and medical samples. I placed the glass vial I had retrieved from the trash bin into a padded envelope along with a secure flash drive containing the video of Cynthia injecting the yellow liquid. My lawyer Harriet had given me the contact for Dr. Aris, a forensic toxicologist who used to work for the state crime lab before going private. He was the best in the business. I told him I needed a full spectrum analysis, and I needed it immediately. I paid the rush fee without blinking. It cost $5,000 to get the truth in 4 hours. While I waited, I continued my vigil at the screens. Cynthia was awake. She moved through the house with the energy of a woman who had everything under control. She made herself a green smoothie. She did yoga in the living room. It was sickening to watch. She was vibrant and alive, while just down the hall, the boy she was supposed to be caring for was slowly dying. At noon, my encrypted phone rang. It was Dr. Aris. Mr. Blackwood, he said, his voice grave and professional. I have completed the analysis of the residue in the vial and cross-referenced it with the video footage you provided. Are you sitting down? I am, I said, gripping the edge of the desk. Tell me. The vial contained a high concentration of arsenic trioxide mixed with a powerful sedative called midazolam, he explained. Arsenic is a heavy metal poison. In the 19th century, they called it the inheritance powder because it mimics natural illness so well. He paused, letting the words sink in. The symptoms of chronic arsenic poisoning include vomiting, abdominal pain, muscle weakness, and confusion. It also causes meese lines on the fingernails and severe hair loss. Mr. Blackwood, looking at the video of your son, the physical deterioration I see perfectly matches heavy metal toxicity. My stomach turned. The doctors Cynthia had hired told us it was an autoimmune disorder attacking his bone marrow. They said the hair loss was from the aggressive immunotherapy. And the sedative, I asked, my voice hollow. Midazolam causes amnesia and compliance. Dr. Aris continued. It makes the patient suggestible and confused. It suppresses the respiratory system. If she is combining these two, she is not just killing him, Mr. Blackwood. She is keeping him in a state of chemical submission while his organs slowly shut down. This is not a disease. This is a slow-motion execution. I thanked him and hung up. I felt sick. I felt a rage so hot it almost blinded me. My son was not sick. He was a 19-year-old athlete who was being poisoned by the woman who tucked him in at night. Every symptom we had cried over, every decline we had mourned, she had manufactured it. I looked back at the screens. I needed to understand how she had gotten away with this for 18 months. How had she kept him quiet? Why had Leo never called me when I was at work? Why had he never texted his friends? I accessed the cloud storage of the hidden cameras I had installed. I scrolled back through the timeline to the morning I had left for my fake trip to New York. I wanted to see what happened the moment I walked out the door. The footage loaded. I saw myself leaving with my suitcase. I saw Cynthia lock the front door. The moment the latch clicked, her demeanor changed. The worried wife act dropped instantly. She pulled out her phone and typed a message likely to Vance. Then she walked into Leo's room. Leo was awake but groggy. He tried to sit up. "Did Dad go?" he asked, his voice thick with the drugs. Cynthia stood at the foot of the bed, crossing her arms. "Yes, he is gone," she said coldly. "And do you know where he went?" "Leo, to Chicago," Leo said. "For work." She laughed. A cruel, sharp sound. "Oh, you poor, stupid boy." "He did not go to Chicago. He went to New York. He went to meet his mistress. He is tired of you, Leo. He told me this morning that he cannot stand the smell of this room anymore. He said watching you die is boring and expensive." I watched my son's face crumble. The physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional devastation she was inflicting. "That is not true," Leo sobbed. "My dad loves me." "Does he?" Cynthia countered, stepping closer. "Then why is he not here? Why does he always leave? Why am I the only one changing your sheets and feeding you? He abandoned you, Leo. He is starting a new life with a younger woman, and he is waiting for you to die so he can stop paying for this equipment. I am the only one keeping you alive because I am too nice to let you go." This was the psychological poison. She was isolating him. She was rewriting his reality. She made him believe he was a burden and that I was a monster. She made him dependent on her not just for medicine, but for human connection, even if that connection was abusive. I watched as she pulled a stack of papers from her bag. "Since your father has abandoned his responsibilities, I need to make sure we can pay the bills," she said. "Sign these." "What are they?" Leo asked, his hand trembling as he held the pen. "Just insurance forms," she lied smoothly. "We need to authorize the next round of treatments. If you do not sign them, the doctors will stop coming and you will die in pain. Do you want that?" Leo shook his head. He was crying. He signed the papers without reading them. He signed them because he was 19 and scared and high on sedatives, and he thought his father hated him. I zoomed in on the video as she held the papers up to the light to check the signature. The resolution on my 4K cameras was crystal clear. They were not insurance forms. The header at the top of the document read, "Durable power of attorney and voluntary guardianship transfer." She had tricked him into signing away his rights. She had made him legally declare that he was incompetent and that she was his sole guardian. I slammed my fist onto the desk. The pieces were falling into place. She did not just want him dead. She needed legal control over him before he died, so she could access the trust fund immediately upon his death without it reverting to me. Or worse, she wanted him alive but legally vegetable so she could drain the accounts year after year. My phone rang again. It was Harriet, my lawyer. It was late afternoon now. "Harrison, we have a major problem," Harriet said, her voice tight with urgency. "I have been monitoring the court filings like you asked. A petition was just lodged electronically 20 minutes ago." "Let me guess," I said, looking at the screen where Cynthia was now calmly reading a magazine next to my dying son. Cynthia filed it. Cynthia filed. "Yes," Harriet confirmed. "She has filed for a certifiable declaration of permanent incapacitation for Leo Blackwood. She has attached affidavits from Dr. Vance and 3 other specialists claiming that Leo has suffered irreversible cognitive decline due to his illness. She paused, and I could hear the rustle of papers. Harrison, she is asking for emergency plenary guardianship. If the judge grants this, she will have total control over his person and his finances. She will be able to make all medical decisions, including end-of-life care. She will be able to liquidate the trust assets for his benefit, which means she can transfer the money to herself. When is the hearing? I asked. She requested an expedited emergency hearing citing his rapid decline, Harriet said. The docket just updated. It is set for Friday morning. That is 3 days from now. 3 days. If she wins on Friday, she becomes his jailer and his executioner. She could legally pull the plug on him on Saturday, and by Monday, she would be cashing the checks. Harriet continued. The documents she submitted include a waiver of notice signed by Leo. It says he agrees to this. It says he knows he is losing his mind and wants her to take over. I watched him sign that. I told her my voice low and dangerous. I have it on video. She told him it was insurance paperwork while she was telling him I abandoned him. It was coerced. He was under the influence of unauthorized sedatives. That is good, Harrison, but it might not be enough to stop the emergency order if the judge sees a medical report saying he is dying. Harriet warned. We need irrefutable proof that he is medically competent and that he is being poisoned. We need to get him out of that house and into a neutral hospital before Friday. I looked at the screen. Cynthia was now on the phone, pacing the room. I checked the audio feed. Yes, Vance, she was saying. I filed it. The hearing is Friday. We just need to keep him barely breathing until then. After the judge bangs the gavel, we can increase the dosage and finish this. Just make sure he looks like a vegetable in court. I hung up with Harriet. My hands were steady now. The shock had passed. The grief had been burned away by a cold, hard resolve. I looked at my son on the screen. He was sleeping the sleep of the drugged, his chest barely rising. He had 3 days left to live if I did nothing. I was not going to wait for Friday. I was not going to wait for a judge. I opened my laptop and pulled up the architectural blueprints of my own house. I had designed it 20 years ago. I knew every vent, every crawl space, every wire. I knew how to get in and out without triggering the perimeter alarms I had installed myself. Cynthia thought she was playing a game of chess. She thought she had checkmated me by sending me to New York. But she forgot one thing. She was playing in a house I built, but I was not ready to strike just yet. I needed to know exactly what she was fighting for. I needed to know where the money was going before I shut her down. I looked at the clock. I had a few hours before dawn. It was time to follow the paper trail. I stayed in the hotel room while Harriet worked her magic on the digital trail. She is not just a lawyer, she is a forensic accountant with a license to kill financially. We spent the next 3 hours dissecting the trust fund ledger. It was a map of betrayal. Look at this, Harriet said, pointing to a series of transactions on her laptop screen. Over the last 2 years, Cynthia has authorized payments totaling $3 million to a company called Biotech Prime for specialized medical equipment. Ventilators, dialysis filters, custom hospital beds. I looked at the screen. I see the equipment in his room, Harriet, I said. It is expensive stuff. It is, she replied. But I cross-referenced the serial numbers she listed on the invoices. These machines in your house are rented, Harrison. They cost maybe $5,000 a month total. But she is billing the trust for purchasing new units at $200,000 apiece. So where is the money going, I asked. Harriet typed a few keys and brought up a corporate registry database. Biotech Prime is a shell company registered in Delaware. It has no employees and no warehouse. Its mailing address forwards to a P.O. box in Miami. And guess who the registered agent is? I leaned in. The name on the screen was Thomas Vance. Dr. Vance's brother, Harriet confirmed. And look at the property records associated with the company. 2 weeks ago, Biotech Prime closed on a $3 million beachfront villa in Key West. I felt a cold bile rise in my throat. They were not just killing my son. They were building their retirement nest on his grave. Every time she told me Leo needed a new machine, she was actually buying patio furniture for her future life with her lover. She was looting my fortune to fund the vacation she planned to take once my son was dead and I was out of the picture. This was the final nail. I had the poison. I had the coercion. Now I had the embezzlement. It was time to go home. I needed to get back inside the house, not just to rescue Leo, but to force Cynthia to show her hand one last time. I needed to see how she would react when the money stopped flowing. I messed up my hair. I loosened my tie until it hung crookedly around my neck. I splashed water on my face to look sweaty and panicked. I practiced the look of a man who had just watched his empire crumble. When I walked through the front door of my own house, I looked like a ghost. Cynthia was in the living room scrolling through her phone, likely looking at furniture for the Florida villa. When she saw me, she jumped up, not with happiness, but with suspicion. "Harrison," she said, sharp and accusing. "What are you doing here? You are supposed to be in New York closing the deal." I collapsed onto the sofa, burying my face in my hands. "It is gone, Cynthia," I moaned. "It is all gone." "What is gone?" she asked, her voice rising. "The deal I said." The buyers pulled out. They found structural issues in the foundation. And then the SEC froze the accounts for an audit. I cannot access the cash. I cannot liquidate the stocks. She stood over me, vibrating with tension. "What does that mean, Harrison? It means we are broke." I lied, looking up at her with pleading eyes. "At least for now. My personal accounts are frozen. The business accounts are locked. We have no liquid cash, Cynthia. We might have to sell this house. We definitely have to cut back on Leo's care. We cannot afford Dr. Vance anymore. We have to move Leo to a state facility." I waited for the supportive wife. I waited for her to say we would get through this together. Instead, her face twisted into a mask of pure, unfiltered hatred. It was as if the human mask she wore finally slipped off, revealing the predator underneath. "You useless old fool," she screamed. She threw her phone at me. It bounced off my chest. "How could you let this happen? We need that money. Do you understand? We have expenses. We have to prioritize," I stammered, playing the weakling. "Leo's care costs $50,000 a month. If we stop the private doctors, we can save the house." "Do not." "You dare," she hissed, leaning down until her face was inches from mine. "If you cut 1 cent from Leo's care, I will ruin you. I will call the police. I will tell them you are neglecting a dying boy to save your own skin. I will sue you for everything you have left." "But Cynthia," I pleaded, "we have no money." "Then find it," she shrieked. "Sell your watch. Sell your car. Sell your kidney for all I care. But you keep that money flowing to Dr. Vance, or I swear to God, Harrison, I will make your life a living hell." She was panting, her chest heaving. She did not care about Leo. She cared that the $3 million faucet was about to be turned off. She needed the medical expenses to continue so she could keep funneling cash to Florida. Just then, the doorbell rang. Cynthia straightened up instantly, smoothing her hair and composing her face into a mask of tragic concern. "That is Dr. Vance," she said coldly. "He is here for Leo's evening treatment. You sit there and be quiet, Harrison. Do not embarrass me." Vance walked in carrying his black medical bag. He looked at me with a mixture of surprise and arrogance. "Mr. Blackwood," he said smoothly, "I did not expect you back so soon. Cynthia tells me there has been a financial hiccup." "A disaster," Cynthia corrected him, glaring at me. "But do not worry, doctor. I will ensure your fees are paid, even if Harrison has to beg on the street." Vance nodded, dismissing me as if I were a piece of furniture. "I need to administer the evening protocol," he said. "Leo has been agitated today." I followed them into Leo's room. I had to witness this. I had to see what they were doing to him right under my nose. Leo was awake, but his eyes were glassy. He looked at me and I saw a flicker of recognition, but no hope. He had given up. "Dad," he mumbled. "Hush," Cynthia said sharply. Dr. Vance is here to give you your vitamin booster. It will help you sleep. Vance pulled a syringe from his bag. It was filled with a clear liquid. It was not vitamins. I knew from my research it was likely a high dose of benzodiazepines or heavy sedatives designed to induce a coma-like state. Wait, I said, standing up. What is that? It is a proprietary blend of B12 and magnesium. Vance lied effortlessly. To support his nervous system. He grabbed Leo's thin arm. Leo flinched. No, Leo whined. I do not want to sleep. I feel weird. It is for your own good, Vance said. He jabbed the needle into the IV port. He pushed the plunger down fast. I watched my son's eyes widen for a second, then roll back. His head lolled to the side. His breathing slowed, instantly becoming heavy and rhythmic. He was out cold in 10 seconds. That was too fast for vitamins. That was a chemical knockout. Vance checked his watch and smiled at Cynthia. There, he said. He is down. That dose is strong enough to keep a horse under for 24 hours. He turned to me, his eyes dead and cold. He will sleep through the night, Mr. Blackwood. And he will sleep through tomorrow. In fact, he will likely sleep right through the court hearing on Friday. He smirked. When the judge sees him in this state, unresponsive, comatose, barely breathing, he will have no choice but to grant Cynthia full emergency guardianship. He will see a vegetable, and he will sign the order. Cynthia stroked Leo's hair, not with affection, but with the possessiveness of an owner petting a prize-winning dog. Perfect, she said. Once I have the guardianship order, we can move him to a hospice facility, and then nature can take its course. They discussed my son's scheduled death right in front of me, thinking I was too broken and bankrupt to stop them. They thought they had won. I stood there looking at my unconscious son. I looked at the man who violated his oath. I looked at the woman who violated our marriage. I will go check on the accounts. I said, my voice flat. Maybe I can unfreeze some assets. Good, Cynthia said, not even looking at me. Go make yourself useful, Harrison. I walked out of the room. I walked out of the house. I did not go to the bank. I pulled out my burner phone and dialed the number for the private extraction team I had hired. It is time, I said. We go tonight. I sat in the back of an unmarked black van parked 2 blocks from my own driveway, checking my watch every 30 seconds. It was 1:58 in the morning. The neighborhood was dead quiet, the kind of silence that only exists in wealthy suburbs where the houses are set far back from the road. Next to me sat Miller and Jones, 2 private security contractors Harriet had vetted. They were ex-military men who specialized in high-risk extractions. They did not ask questions. They just followed the plan. I could not wait for the court hearing on Friday. I could not wait for the legal system to grind its slow gears while my son's organs were shutting down. Vance's words echoed in my head. That dose is strong enough to keep a horse under. My son was not a horse. He was a 19-year-old boy who had been starved and poisoned for 18 months. If I left him in that room tonight, he would not just sleep through the hearing, he would sleep forever. At exactly 2 a.m. we moved. We did not storm the front door like a SWAT team. I walked up the driveway with my keys in hand. Miller disabled the perimeter sensors using a bypass code I had set up years ago, one that Cynthia did not know existed. We slipped through the side entrance into the mudroom. The house was dark and smelled faintly of lavender and stale medicine. We moved silently across the marble floors. I paused outside the master bedroom. I could hear the faint sound of a white noise machine inside. Cynthia was sleeping. She was resting comfortably, probably dreaming of the funeral she was planning. The urge to open that door and wake her up with the reality of her failure was overwhelming, but I pushed it down. The mission was Leo. Only Leo. We reached his room. I eased the door open. The air inside was thick and hot. The humidifier was running full blast, making the room feel like a swamp. It was another one of her tactics to make him uncomfortable, to make it hard for him to breathe. Leo was exactly where I had left him, passed out on the bed, his mouth slightly open, his skin the color of old parchment. He looked like a corpse that had not yet stopped breathing. I signaled to Miller. He moved to the left side of the bed while Jones took the right. I went to the IV stand. I did not just pull the needle out. I disconnected the bag of fluids the one Vance had injected with the so-called vitamins. I capped the line and handed the bag to Jones. This was not trash. This was evidence. This was the weapon. "We need to move him," I whispered. Miller slid his arms under Leo's shoulders, and Jones took his legs. They lifted him on the count of 3. My heart broke in that moment. They lifted him with no effort at all. My son, who used to bench press 200 pounds, was now nothing more than dead weight. He did not stir. He did not groan. His head lolled back, limp and heavy. We carried him out through the kitchen and out the side door. The night air was cool and crisp, a sharp contrast to the suffocating heat of his sick room. A private ambulance I had chartered was waiting at the end of the streetlights off engine idling. We loaded him onto the stretcher. The paramedics immediately went to work checking his vitals. "Pulse is thready," one of them said, hooking him up to a portable monitor. "BP is 70/40. He is barely perfusing." "What was he given, benzodiazepines and heavy metals?" I said, my voice shaking. "Arsenic and likely midazolam." The medic looked at me with wide eyes, then shouted to the driver, "Go! University Hospital, code 3. We took off into the night. I sat in the back holding my unconscious son's hand. It was cold. I rubbed it, trying to put some warmth back into him, trying to tell him through my touch that he was safe, that I had him, that I would never let go again. We arrived at the University Medical Center 20 minutes later. We bypassed the general emergency room. Dr. Aris had arranged for a direct admission to the secure toxicology unit. A team was waiting for us at the loading dock. They swarmed the ambulance, moving with a precision and urgency that Cynthia's hired doctors never showed. They wheeled him into a negative pressure room. I watched through the glass as they intubated him, not to silence him, but to save him. They inserted a central line into his neck. They hooked him up to a dialysis machine the size of a refrigerator. "We need to filter his blood," Dr. Aris told me, stepping out of the room for a moment. "The arsenic levels are critical. We are starting chelation therapy immediately to bind the metals and dialysis to wash the sedatives out of his system. It is going to be a rough few hours, Harrison. His kidneys are on the verge of failure." I stood by the glass watching my son's blood flow out of his body into the machine, dark and sluggish, and then flow back in a lighter shade of red. It was a mechanical cleansing. I prayed it was enough. Back at the house, the sun was coming up. I checked the camera feed on my phone. The house was still quiet. Cynthia slept until 9 a.m. She took her time waking up. She stretched. She checked her phone. Then she put on her silk robe and walked down the hall to check on her prisoner. I watched the screen as she opened the door to Leo's room. She stopped in the doorway. She blinked. She took a step inside, looking at the empty bed, the disconnected machines, the missing IV bag. She did not scream. Not at first. She ran to the bathroom, thinking maybe he had crawled in there. Empty. She checked the closet. Empty. Then the panic set in. She ran back to the bed and stripped the sheets as if he might be hiding under the mattress. She spun around, wild-eyed. She realized he was gone. And if he was gone, the money was gone. The leverage was gone. She grabbed her phone and dialed. I expected her to call Vance. Instead, she dialed 911. I switched to the audio feed. "Police, please help me," she screamed into the phone, putting on the performance of a lifetime. "My son is gone. Someone broke into our house. He is dying. He needs life support. I think my husband took him. My husband is having a mental breakdown. He threatened to kill us yesterday. Please, you have to find him before he hurts my boy." She was brilliant. She was evil. She turned the narrative instantly. I was the kidnapper. I was the danger. She knew exactly what buttons to push to get a SWAT team deployed. 40 minutes later, I saw the flashing lights reflect off the hospital walls. I was still standing by the glass looking at Leo. His color was slightly better. The dialysis machine was humming rhythmically. I heard the commotion at the nurse's station down the hall. Heavy boots, shouting. Clear the hallway, a voice boomed. I did not run. I did not hide. I stood my ground. The double doors to the toxicology unit burst open. 4 police officers rushed in, guns drawn. Behind them was a frantic Cynthia, tears streaming down her face, screaming about her baby. "There he is," she shrieked, pointing a manicured finger at me. "He took him. He is killing him. Arrest him." "Police, drop to your knees," the lead officer shouted, aiming a taser at my chest. "Hands where I can see them." I raised my hands slowly, palms open. I did not drop to my knees. I stood tall. I stood like the father who had just saved his son's life. "Officer, I am unarmed," I said calmly, my voice cutting through the chaos. "I am the legal father of this boy." And I surrendered. Cynthia rushed past the police, trying to get to the room, trying to get to the machines. "He disconnected the life support," she wailed, reaching for the door handle. "He is trying to murder him." "Stop," I roared. The command was so authoritative that even the police paused. "Do not let that woman into that room," I said, pointing at Cynthia. "She is the reason he is here." "She is his mother," the officer said, stepping forward. "You are the one who kidnapped a critical patient. We have orders to return him to his custodial home." "He is not going back to that house," I said. "Sir, get on the ground now, or I will deploy the taser," the officer warned. I looked him in the eye. I looked at Cynthia, who was now trembling, not with grief, but with the terror of being exposed. "I will get on the ground," I said, lowering myself slowly. "But before you put those cuffs on me, officer, I want you to do one thing." I pointed to the doctor who had just emerged from the room, holding a clipboard with a printout of the blood analysis. "Ask the doctor what is in my son's blood," I said. "Ask him why a boy who supposedly has an autoimmune disease has 500 times the lethal limit of arsenic in his veins." Cynthia stopped screaming. The color drained from her face faster than it had from my son's. The room went silent. The officer looked at me, then at Cynthia, then at the doctor. "Doctor," the officer asked, lowering his weapon slightly. Dr. Aris adjusted his glasses and looked at the police with the disdain of a man of science interrupted by foolishness. "The patient is suffering from acute heavy metal poisoning and a massive overdose of unauthorized sedatives," Dr. Aris stated clearly. "If Mr. Blackwood had not brought him in 3 hours ago, he would be dead." "This is not a kidnapping, officer. This is a rescue." I watched Cynthia. I watched the realization hit her that her performance was over. I watched her eyes dart to the exit. "Check the IV bag," I said from the floor as the officer holstered his taser, "the one she injected him with last night. We brought it with us. It is in the evidence bag." The officers turned to look at Cynthia. She took a step back. "That is a lie," she whispered. "He is crazy. He is lying." But nobody was looking at me anymore. They were looking at her. And for the first time, she looked exactly like what she was. A cornered animal. The silence in the hospital corridor was heavier than the lead vests they use in the radiology department. The police sergeant took the clipboard from Dr. Aris and read the numbers. I watched his eyes scan the page. He blinked once, then twice. He looked at the toxicology report, and then he looked at the shaking woman standing by the door. The weapon in his hand lowered slowly until it clicked back into its holster. "You are telling me this boy has enough arsenic in him to kill a platoon?" the sergeant asked, his voice quiet and dangerous. Dr. Aris nodded gravely. "It is a miracle his kidneys are still functioning. The levels of thallium and arsenic are consistent with prolonged systematic dosing over a period of at least 12 months. And the acute spike from last night was lethal. If Mr. Blackwood had not kidnapped his son, and I use that term very loosely, Officer Leo would be in the morgue right now, not the dialysis unit." The dynamic in the room shifted instantly. The officers stepped back from me. The threat assessment had changed. I was no longer the unstable husband. I was the witness. Cynthia tried to rally. She tried to summon the tears that had served her so well for the last 2 years. "That is a lie," she screamed, her voice cracking. "He paid the doctor off. Harrison has millions of dollars. He bribed the lab. He poisoned Leo himself to frame me because I wanted a divorce." But the performance was falling flat. The officers were not looking at her with sympathy anymore. They were looking at her with professional suspicion. "Ma'am, I need you to step away from the treatment area," the sergeant said, stepping between Cynthia and the door. "We are going to need to take a statement from you. A very long statement." "My lawyer will hear about this," she hissed, pulling her arm away. "You are making a mistake. That man is dangerous." "We will figure out who is dangerous soon enough, ma'am," the officer replied. "Right now, this remains a crime scene investigation. You are not to leave the city." They escorted her out. She left kicking and screaming, threatening lawsuits and ruin for everyone involved. But as she was dragged away, she looked back at the room where Leo lay. I saw the calculation in her eyes. She was terrified, but she was also betting on one thing. She was betting that Leo would never wake up. She believed Vance's cocktail had done enough damage to scramble his brain forever. As long as Leo could not speak, she thought she could still spin the narrative. She thought she could still blame me. I stood up and dusted off my knees. The sergeant looked at me. "Mr. Blackwood, we are going to keep a detail at the door," he said. "No one goes in or out without your permission. We will need your statement too, but for now, go be with your son." I walked into the room. The hum of the dialysis machine was the only sound. Leo looked small in the bed. The tubes running in and out of his body were clearing the poison from his blood, but they could not clear the poison from his life. I sat in the chair by his bedside and held his hand. I watched the monitors. I watched the rise and fall of his chest, and I waited. It took 4 hours for the fog to lift. Around 7 in the morning, Leo's eyelids fluttered. He groaned a sound of deep confusion and pain. "Dad," he rasped. I leaned forward. "I am here, Leo." He blinked, trying to focus. His eyes darted around the sterile room, panic rising in his chest. "Where am I? Where is Mom? Where is Cynthia?" The question cut me deeper than any knife. Even after everything, even after the pain and the fear, his first instinct was to call for her. She had groomed him so perfectly. She had made herself his savior, his angel of mercy. He loved her. He trusted her more than he trusted me because she was the one who brought him water when he was thirsty. Even if she was the one who dehydrated him in the first place. "She is not here, son," I said softly. "You are in the hospital. You are safe." "I want Cynthia." Leo cried, his voice weak but frantic. "She needs to give me my medicine. I hurt Dad. I need her. You do not understand my protocol. You are going to kill me." He tried to pull the tubes out of his arm. He was fighting me. He was fighting the people who saved him to get back to the person who was killing him. "Leo, stop," I said, holding his wrists gently. "You have to listen to me." "No, get away from me," he sobbed. "Cynthia said you would do this. She said you would try to take me away. She said you hate me." I realized then that words would not be enough. I could tell him she poisoned him, but he would not believe me. He was too deep in the web she had spun. I had to break his heart to save his life. I had to show him this monster beneath the mask. I pulled out my tablet. I opened the video file I had recorded the night before. The file named The Confession. "I am sorry, Leo," I whispered. "I am so sorry. You have to see this." I pressed play and held the screen in front of his face. Leo watched. He watched the high-definition footage of his bedroom. He saw Cynthia standing over him while he slept. He saw her inject the yellow liquid. He heard her voice crystal clear through the speakers. Pain means the medicine is working, she had said on the video. If you are not a good boy, I will pull the breathing tube out. Leo went still. His breathing hitched. Then the video cut to the living room. He saw Cynthia sitting with Vance. He saw them drinking my scotch. He saw them laughing. The brat turns 20 next month, Cynthia said on the screen. We cannot let him reach 21. Leo stared at the woman he called Mom. He watched her discuss his death as if she were planning a dinner menu. He heard her call him a burden. He heard her laugh about how easy it was to trick him into signing his rights away. Then came the part that broke him completely. He is so pathetic, Cynthia said on the video, imitating Leo's weak voice. Mom, I am thirsty. Mom, I am scared. God, I will be glad when he is finally dead. I am so tired of pretending to care about that useless cripple. I turned the tablet off. The silence in the hospital room was absolute. Leo did not scream. He did not thrash. He just stared at the blank screen, his mouth slightly open, tears pooling in his eyes and spilling over, running down his temples into his ears. It was the sound of a world shattering. The person he relied on, the person he defended, the person he loved, was a predator who viewed him as nothing more than a paycheck with an expiration date. She made me soup, Leo whispered, his voice breaking. She sat with me when I had fevers. It was all a lie, son, I said, gripping his hand. She was making you sick, Leo. The doctors found arsenic in your blood. She was poisoning you to keep you weak so she could steal your trust fund. Leo turned his head into the pillow. A guttural sob ripped through his chest. It was the sound of pure betrayal. He cried like a child who wakes up to find himself alone in the dark. He cried for the mother he thought he had. He cried for the years of pain he had endured for nothing. I stood up and hugged him, burying his face in my shoulder. I let him cry. I let him grieve the death of the illusion. I am here, I said again and again. I am not going anywhere. I have got you. After a long time, his sobbing subsided into shallow, ragged breaths. He looked up at me, his eyes red and swollen but clear for the first time in years. The fog of the sedatives and the manipulation was lifting. Did she really say those things, he asked. Yes. Is she going to come back? No, I said firmly. She is never coming near you again. Leo closed his eyes. He looked exhausted, but there was a new set to his jaw, a hardness that had not been there before. Do not let her win, Dad, he whispered. I promise you, I said. She has already lost. But Cynthia did not know she had lost. That was the key. She had been escorted out of the hospital, but she had not been arrested yet. The police were still processing the evidence. The lab results were preliminary. She had called her lawyer a shark named Alvarez, who had likely told her to stay calm and stick to the narrative. She believed that Leo was brain damaged from the overdose. She believed that even if he survived, he would be incoherent. She believed that with Vance's fabricated medical records, she could convince a judge that I was a paranoid old man who had kidnapped a terminally ill boy and endangered his life. She was banking on the court hearing. It was scheduled for tomorrow morning. She thought she would walk into that courtroom, play the grieving, exhausted mother, and walk out with the guardianship order that would give her the keys to the kingdom. She did not know Leo was awake. She did not know he had seen the video. She did not know that the boy she thought was a vegetable was now the most dangerous witness on earth. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was noon. The hearing was in less than 24 hours. I told the police officer at the door to keep a tight lid on Leo's condition. To the outside world, Leo Blackwood was in a coma, fighting for his life. No one was to know he was sitting up and drinking apple juice. I kissed my son on the forehead. Rest, I told him. You need your strength. Tomorrow we are going to court. I walked out of the hospital and into the sunlight. I had one more stop to make before the trial. I had to meet with Harriet. We had to prepare the trap. Cynthia and Vance were going to walk into that courtroom expecting a coronation. I was going to make sure, It was an execution. The Friday morning sun was bright, but inside the county courthouse the air was cold and smelled of floor wax and desperation. I sat in the back row for a moment, watching the performance before making my presence known. Cynthia was already seated at the plaintiff's table. She was wearing a modest black dress that I had never seen before. It was the kind of dress a grieving mother wears to a funeral. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and she dabbed at her dry eyes with a tissue every time the judge looked in her direction. Next to her sat her lawyer, a sharp-featured man in a $3,000 suit, who checked his watch every 30 seconds. And behind them in the gallery sat Vance. He was wearing a suit, trying to look like a respectable medical professional, but his knee was bouncing nervously. He kept whispering to Cynthia, likely reassuring her that the drugs he had administered were irreversible. They looked like a team on the verge of a championship win, confident that the opposition had forfeited the game. The bailiff called the session to order. The judge, a stern woman named Judge Halloway, who had a reputation for zero tolerance of family drama, took the bench. She looked over her glasses at the empty defense table where I was supposed to be. "Is the respondent present?" The judge asked, her voice echoing in the high-ceilinged room. Cynthia's lawyer stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Your Honor, Mr. Blackwood has not arrived," he began, his tone dripping with false sympathy. "Given his erratic behavior yesterday and the kidnapping of the victim, we believe he has fled the jurisdiction. We ask that you proceed with the emergency ex parte hearing immediately. My client is terrified for her son's life. Every minute we waste is a minute Leo Blackwood is without proper medical care." The judge nodded, looking at the thick file in front of her. "Proceed, counselor," she said. "State your case." Cynthia stood up. She did not walk to the witness stand. She clung to the table as if she were too weak to stand alone. "Your Honor," she sobbed, her voice trembling perfectly. "I do not want to hurt my husband. I love Harrison. But he is 70 years old, and his mind is... He is not the man he used to be. He has become paranoid. He thinks everyone is trying to steal his money. Yesterday he broke into our home and dragged my dying son out of his bed. Leo is on life support, Your Honor. He needs a ventilator. He needs his medication. Harrison took him to God knows where." She paused to wipe a tear that wasn't there. "Dr. Vance, who has been treating Leo for 2 years, says that moving him could cause a fatal cardiac event." She continued, pointing a shaking hand at Vance. "We just want Leo back. I just want to hold my son's hand before he passes. Please, Your Honor, grant me guardianship so I can send the police to retrieve him and put him back in hospice care where he belongs. And please freeze Harrison's assets. He is liquidating everything to run away. He is using Leo's trust fund to fund his delusions. It was a masterpiece of fiction. She painted me as a senile, dangerous lunatic and herself as the saintly martyr." Vance nodded solemnly from the gallery, playing the part of the concerned specialist. Her lawyer jumped back in, handing a stack of documents to the bailiff. "We have affidavits here from Dr. Vance and 2 other consulting physicians stating that Leo Blackwood has suffered permanent cognitive failure due to the progression of his autoimmune disease," the lawyer stated. "Even if he is physically recovered, he is mentally absent. He is a vegetable, Your Honor. He cannot make decisions. He cannot speak. He requires a legal guardian to manage his end-of-life care and his estate. We are asking for full plenary guardianship to be transferred to Mrs. Cynthia Blackwood, effective immediately." The judge flipped through the papers. She saw the medical jargon, the falsified charts, the grim prognosis. It looked official. It looked irrefutable. "This is very serious," the judge said, frowning. "If the father is endangering the ward..." I decided that was enough. I stood up from the back bench. I adjusted my tie. I did not rush. I walked down the center aisle of the courtroom with the steady, measured pace of a man inspecting a building foundation. "I am here, Your Honor," I said, my voice calm and resonant, carrying to every corner of the room. Cynthia whipped around. Her eyes went wide. She had expected me to be in jail or on the run. She did not expect me to be standing 10 feet away, looking cleaner and sharper than I had in years. Vance stopped bouncing his leg. He went rigid. The judge looked at me over her spectacles. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, "you are late. You are also unrepresented. Where is your counsel? I do not need counsel today." "Your Honor," I said, stopping at the defense table, "I do not need to argue points of law. I am here to clarify the facts." Cynthia's lawyer sneered. "Your Honor, this man is dangerous," he said, moving to block me from Cynthia as if I were about to attack her. "He has no medical training, and he has abducted the patient. We demand he disclose the location of Leo Blackwood immediately." I ignored him. I looked directly at Cynthia. I saw the fear start to creep into her eyes behind the mask of grief. She was looking at the door, expecting the police to burst in and arrest me. She did not understand why I was so calm. "Your Honor," I said, turning to the bench, "my wife claims that my son is in a vegetative state. She claims he is dying of an autoimmune disorder. She claims I am mentally incompetent." I paused, letting the silence stretch. I am not here to defend myself against these accusations with words. I am not here to show you charts or affidavits paid for with stolen money. "Then what are you here for, Mr. Blackwood?" the judge asked, her patience thinning. "This is an emergency hearing regarding the life of a young man. Do you have a defense?" "No, Your Honor," I said. "I do not have a defense. I have a witness." Cynthia let out a short, nervous laugh. "A witness?" she scoffed. "Who? Harrison, one of your drinking buddies, a paid actor. Leo is in a coma. Who could possibly speak for him?" I turned to the double doors at the back of the courtroom. I nodded to the bailiff standing there. "I call Leo Blackwood to the stand," I said. The room went dead silent. Cynthia's lawyer looked confused. Vance stood up halfway out of his seat, his face draining of color. The double doors swung open. A young nurse in blue scrubs pushed a wheelchair into the room. And sitting in that chair was not a vegetable. It was not a corpse. It was my son. Leo was thin, yes. He looked like a ghost of his former self. His skin was pale, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He had an IV pole attached to the chair, but he was sitting upright. His head was held high, and his eyes were open. They were wide open, and they were burning with a fire I had not seen in 18 months. He scanned the room. He looked at the judge. He looked at me. And then his gaze landed on the woman at the plaintiff's table. Cynthia let out a sound that was not human. It was a strangled gasp, like the air had been sucked out of her lungs. She grabbed the table for support, her fingernails scratching against the wood. Her knees buckled, and she slumped into her chair, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "It is impossible," she whispered. He is supposed to be." "Asleep," I finished for her, my voice cutting like a razor. Dead Vance looked like he was about to vomit. He looked at the exit, but the bailiff had already moved to block the door, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. Leo's wheelchair rolled down the aisle. The squeak of the wheels was the only sound in the room. He stopped right next to me. He reached out and took my hand. His grip was weak, but it was real. "Your Honor," the lawyer stammered, trying to regain control of the narrative. "This is highly irregular. The patient is clearly in no condition to be here. This is abuse. Mr. Blackwood is parading a sick boy." "I can speak for myself," Leo said. His voice was raspy, unused to volume, but it was clear. It echoed off the walls. The judge's eyebrows shot up into her hairline. She looked from the medical report on her desk, which stated Leo was nonverbal and comatose, to the young man sitting in front of her. "State your name for the record." "Young man," the judge said, her voice softening. "Leo James Blackwood." Leo said, "I am 19 years old, and I am not a vegetable." Cynthia was shaking her head violently, her hands covering her mouth. She was watching her $15 million payout talk. She was watching her freedom evaporate. Leo turned his chair so he was facing her directly. He looked at the woman who had poisoned his soup. He looked at the woman who had whispered threats to him in the dark. "Hello, Mom," he said. "I am feeling much better today." The look he gave her was not one of anger. It was one of absolute, devastating pity. "I saw the video," Leo said, his voice gaining strength. "I saw what you did. I heard what you said to Dr. Vance." Vance tried to bolt. He actually made a run for the side door, scrambling over the railing of the gallery. "Bailiff, restrain that man," the judge shouted, slamming her gavel. 2 deputies tackled Vance before he got 3 steps. The commotion filled the room, but I did not look away from Cynthia. I wanted to see it. I wanted to see the moment she realized there was no way out. She looked at me. Her eyes were wide, pleading. She was looking for the weak old husband she thought she could manipulate. "Harrison," she whispered. "Harrison, please." "He is confused." "The drugs." I reached into my jacket pocket. I pulled out a flash drive. "Your Honor," I said, handing it to the clerk, "this drive contains video evidence recorded inside my home over the last 48 hours. It shows this woman injecting my son with arsenic. It shows her conspiring with that man to murder him before his 21st birthday. And it shows her celebrating the fact that she thought I was too stupid to stop her." The judge took the drive. She looked at Cynthia with a gaze that could strip paint. "Counselor," the judge said to Cynthia's lawyer, "I suggest you sit down and be quiet unless you want to be held in contempt as an accessory to attempted murder." The lawyer dropped his briefcase and stepped away from Cynthia as if she were radioactive. She was left standing alone at the table, trembling in her black dress. The trap had snapped shut, and she was right in the middle of it. The courtroom was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. All eyes were fixed on the young man in the wheelchair. Leo griped the armrests, his knuckles white as he gathered the strength to speak. He looked frail, a shadow of the athlete he used to be, but his eyes were locked onto the judge with a fierce determination. "State your case, Mr. Blackwood," the judge said gently. "Tell us why you are here." Leo took a ragged breath. The tube in his arm rattled slightly against the metal of the chair. "I am here because that woman is not my mother," he said, pointing a trembling finger at Cynthia. "She is my jailer. For 18 months I thought I was dying. I thought my body was failing me. But it was not my body. It was her." Cynthia let out a sharp cry. "Leo, stop this! You are confused, honey. The medication—" "Silence, ma'am," the judge snapped, her voice cracking like a whip. "Let him speak." Leo ignored Cynthia. He did not look at her again. He kept his eyes on the judge as if she were the only person in the room who could save him. Every night she came into my room, he continued, his voice gaining a little more power with every word. "She told me she was giving me medicine to help me sleep. She told me it would make the pain go away. But it always burned. It felt like fire moving through my veins. When I cried, she told me I was weak. She told me I had to be strong, or my father would stop paying for my treatment." I flinched. Even though I knew she had lied to him, hearing it out loud, hearing the cruelty of using a son's love for his father as a weapon, broke my heart all over again. "She told me you left me, Dad," Leo said, turning to me for a brief second. "She said you went to New York with another woman because you were sick of looking at me. She said I was a burden. She said the only reason I was still in that house was because she convinced you not to throw me into a state facility." "That is a lie," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "I never left you, Leo." "I know that now," Leo said, "but I did not know it then. I was alone. I was scared. She isolated me, Your Honor. She took my phone. She blocked my friends. She told everyone I was too sick to have visitors. I spent 18 months in that room staring at the ceiling, waiting to die because she told me death was the only way out." He paused, coughing slightly. The nurse stepped forward to offer him water, but he waved her away. He wanted to finish. "She made me sign papers," he said. "She told me they were insurance forms. She held my hand and guided the pen because I was too weak to hold it myself. She told me if I did not sign, the doctors would stop coming. She tricked me. I never wanted her to be my guardian. I want my father. I have always wanted my father. Cynthia was sobbing now, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of panic. Her lawyer was furiously whispering to her, but she was shaking her head, looking around the room like a trapped animal. Your Honor, Leo finished, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. She is not trying to save me. She is trying to kill me before I turn 21. She wants the money. That is all I am to her, a paycheck with a heartbeat. The judge sat back in her chair. Her face was pale. She looked at the medical reports on her desk, the ones signed by Dr. Vance claiming Leo was incoherent and vegetative. Then she looked at the articulate, devastated young man in front of her. The contradiction was glaring. It was criminal. Mr. Blackwood, the judge said, turning to me. You mentioned a witness. Your son has spoken, and his testimony is compelling. But these are grave accusations. Do you have physical evidence to support these claims? I stood up. I walked to the clerk's desk where I had placed the flash drive. I do, Your Honor, I said. I have video evidence recorded inside my home over the last 48 hours. It confirms everything my son just said, and it implicates Dr. Vance directly. Vance, who was still being restrained by 2 deputies in the gallery, went limp. He knew what was on that drive. He knew his career and his freedom were over. Play it, the judge ordered. The clerk plugged the drive into the courtroom's AV system. A large screen on the wall flickered to life. The audio boomed through the speakers. The first scene was the bedroom. It showed Cynthia standing over a sleeping Leo. It showed the needle. It showed the yellow liquid. Pain means the medicine is working. Cynthia's voice sneered from the speakers. The courtroom gasped. It was a collective sound of horror. To hear a mother figure speak with such malice to a helpless boy was beyond comprehension. Then the scene changed. It was the living room. Cynthia and Vance were drinking scotch. The timestamp was just 2 nights ago. The brat turns 20 next month, Cynthia said on the screen, her face twisted in a cruel smile. We cannot let him reach 21. We have to speed up the timeline, Vance replied, his voice calm and professional, as if discussing a business deal. The arsenic is tricky. It has to look like organ failure. The judge's face turned a deep shade of red. Her hands gripped the edge of the bench so hard her knuckles were white. She was watching a conspiracy to commit capital murder unfold in high definition. Did you bring the new batch? Cynthia asked in the video. Vance nodded. It is double concentration. The video ended. The screen went black. For a moment there was absolute silence in the room. It was the silence of shock. The silence of people realizing they were in the presence of monsters. Then the judge moved. She did not look at the papers. She did not consult the clerk. She grabbed her gavel and slammed it down with a force that made everyone jump. This hearing is adjourned, she announced, her voice shaking with fury. But no one is leaving this room. Bailiff, take Mrs. Blackwood into custody immediately, Cynthia screamed. It was a high, piercing sound. No, she shrieked as the bailiff moved toward her. You cannot do this. That video is fake. It is deepfake technology. Harrison made it. He is framing me. Counselor, the judge roared at Cynthia's lawyer. Control your client or join her in the holding cell. The lawyer stepped back, holding his hands up. I am withdrawing from this case, Your Honor, he stammered. I cannot represent this. Cynthia was alone. The bailiff grabbed her arms and pulled her hands behind her back. The click of the handcuffs echoed through the room, and that man, the judge, pointed a shaking finger at Vance in the gallery. Arrest him. I want him held on suspicion of attempted murder, conspiracy, and medical malpractice. Do not let him leave this building. Chaos erupted. The deputies who were standing near Vance moved to secure him. But in the confusion caused by Cynthia's screaming and the lawyers scrambling, Vance saw his opening. He was sitting near the aisle. As the deputies turned their attention to the bailiff, struggling with the kicking, Cynthia Vance lunged. He did not run toward the main doors where the guards were stationed. He vaulted over the wooden railing that separated the gallery from the side exit, a door usually reserved for court staff. "He is running," Leo shouted, pointing. I turned just in time to see the tail of Vance's suit jacket disappear through the side door. "Stop him!" I yelled, running toward the railing. The deputies realized their mistake too late. They scrambled over the benches, pushing past shocked spectators. He went out the side door. One deputy shouted into his radio, "Suspect is fleeing the building. Lock down the perimeter." I ran to the door and pushed it open. It led to a stairwell. I could hear the rapid clatter of footsteps echoing below. Vance was fast. He was running for his life, running from a life sentence, running with the desperation of a man who knew his house of cards had just caught fire. I started to go after him, but a hand grabbed my arm. It was the bailiff. "Let the police handle it, Mr. Blackwood," he said, breathless. "You stay here. You are safe." I looked back into the courtroom. Cynthia was being dragged out through the main doors, screaming my name, cursing me, vowing revenge. Leo was sitting in his wheelchair watching the woman who tried to kill him being hauled away like common trash. He looked exhausted, but he was smiling, a small, tired smile of victory. "We got her," I said, walking back to him. Leo nodded, taking my hand, but he got away. "Dad," Leo whispered, looking at the side door. "Vance got away." "Not for long," I said, my voice hard. "He has nowhere to go. I froze his assets this morning. He is running with nothing but the clothes on his back." I looked at the empty doorway where Vance had vanished. He might have slipped the net for now, but he was a man used to luxury, used to soft living. He would not last long on the streets, and I knew exactly where he would try to go. He would try to get the money in the offshore accounts, the money I had already flagged with the FBI. Let him run, I thought. It will only make it worse for him when they catch him. The judge was still on the bench, breathing hard. She looked at me and then at Leo. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice still trembling with rage, "I am issuing an immediate order granting you full sole guardianship of your son. I am also issuing a protective order against Cynthia Blackwood and Thomas Vance, and I am referring this entire matter to the district attorney for immediate criminal prosecution." "Thank you, Your Honor," I said. "Get him to a hospital," the judge said, looking at Leo with softness in her eyes. "Get him well. Justice has just begun." I wheeled my son out of the courtroom. We passed the spot where Cynthia had stood. The air still smelled of her expensive perfume, masking the rot underneath. We walked out into the hallway, where the press was already gathering, drawn by the police scanners and the rumors of a high society scandal. I did not stop for them. I pushed Leo toward the elevators. We had won the battle. Cynthia was in chains, but the war was not over. Vance was loose, and he was the one who knew where the bodies were buried. Literally. I pulled out my phone and dialed the private investigator. "Vance is a rabbit," I said. "He just bolted from the courthouse. Find him." Vance disappeared into the city like a rat scurrying into the sewer. The police set up a perimeter around the courthouse, but he was gone. He had slipped through a service exit and vanished into the mid-morning crowds of downtown. The officers were furious, barking orders into their radios, coordinating a grid search. But I stood in the hallway next to my son's wheelchair, feeling a strange sense of calm. I was not worried. I knew exactly where Thomas Vance was going, and I knew exactly what he would find when he got there. Vance was a man who loved comfort. He was a man who wore $3,000 suits and drank my vintage scotch. He was not built for life on the run. He needed money, and he thought he had plenty of it. He thought he had $3 million sitting in a numbered account in the Cayman Islands, waiting to fund his escape to a non-extradition country. What he did not know was that Harriet Sloan was faster than he was. 24 hours before the hearing, the moment we confirmed the flow of money to the shell company Biotech Prime, Harriet had filed an emergency injunction with the international banking authorities. She had flagged the accounts as proceeds of organized criminal activity. Right now, Vance was likely huddled in a bathroom stall or an internet cafe frantically tapping on his phone trying to transfer funds. And right now he was staring at a screen that said, "Account frozen, contact administrator." He was staring at a balance of zero. He had no cash. He had no cards. He was a fugitive with nothing but the lint in his pockets. He was not running toward freedom, he was running into a wall. While the manhunt for Vance expanded across the city, I turned my attention to the prisoner we already had. Cynthia was denied bail. The judge had seen the video. She had seen the malice. She deemed Cynthia a flight risk and a danger to the community. My wife was transported to the county detention center in the back of a squad car, her hands cuffed behind her back, her face pressed against the wire mesh. That night I sat in my empty house. It felt different. The air was cleaner. The oppressive weight of her presence was gone. I had a glass of wine not to celebrate, but to steady my nerves. The phone rang. The caller ID showed County Correctional Facility. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to let it ring. Part of me wanted to cut her out of my life, instantly and forever. But another part, the part that had spent 10 years loving a phantom, needed to hear her voice one last time. I needed to hear the lie die. I accepted the call. Harrison came the voice. It was broken, sobbing, hysterical. "Harrison, please, you have to help me. You cannot leave me in here. It is cold. The women in here are terrifying. Please get me a lawyer. Get me out." I took a sip of wine. "You had a lawyer, Cynthia," I said calmly. "He quit in the courtroom. Remember?" "He was incompetent," she wailed. "Harrison, you have to listen to me." It was Vance. It was all Vance. He made me do it. He gave me the drugs. He told me they were supplements. I did not know what was in them. He threatened me, Harrison. He said he would hurt you if I did not help him get the money. I was trying to protect you. I was a victim too. The audacity was breathtaking. Even now, trapped in a cage, she was trying to spin the web. She was trying to rewrite history. "I watched the video, Cynthia," I said. "I saw you inject him. I heard you tell Vance to double the dose. I heard you call my son a brat who needed to die before his birthday. No one held a gun to your head. You were laughing. You were drinking my scotch and planning a murder. That was a performance," she screamed. "I was playing along to keep Vance happy so he would not hurt us. I love Leo. I love you. Please, baby, do not do this to me. I am your wife." "You are not my wife," I said. "You are a stranger who lived in my house. And tomorrow I am coming down there, not to bail you out, but to say goodbye." I hung up. She called back 5 times. I blocked the number. The next morning I drove to the detention center. It was a grim, concrete building surrounded by razor wire. I went through security. I surrendered my phone and my keys. I sat in a small booth with a thick plexiglass barrier. When they brought Cynthia in, she looked like a different person. The glamour was gone. Her hair was matted. She was wearing a shapeless orange jumpsuit that washed out her complexion. She looked old. She looked hard. She sat down and picked up the receiver. Her eyes were red-rimmed but dry. The weeping victim act was gone. She looked at me with a cold calculation. "You look pleased with yourself," she said, her voice tinny through the phone. "I am not pleased," I said. "I am relieved. Leo is awake. He is talking. The doctors say his kidneys will recover." Her face twitched. Disappointment. She was disappointed that the boy she raised for 10 years had survived. "So what now, Harrison?" she asked, leaning forward. "You came here to gloat, to rub it in." "No," I said. "I came here to tell you the truth because you seem to have trouble recognizing it. You told me on the phone that Vance manipulated you. You said you were a victim." "I was," she hissed. "He is a doctor. He controlled everything." I leaned closer to the glass. "No, Cynthia. I said, my voice steady. Vance was the tool. You were the architect. You were the one who isolated Leo. You were the one who intercepted his mail. You were the one who fired the nurses who asked too many questions. You were the one who filed the guardianship papers. Vance just wanted money. You wanted power. You wanted to play God. She stared at me, her jaw set. You are the director, Cynthia, I continued. You wrote the script. You cast the actors. You set the stage. But you forgot one thing. You forgot that the audience was watching. And now the show is over. It is time to take a bow. She slammed the receiver against the glass. You old fool, she spat, the venom finally flowing freely. You think you won. You think you are smart. You are just a lucky old man who got suspicious at the right time. I almost had it all. I was days away. Do you know how hard it was to live with you? To pretend to care about your boring stories and your pathetic son? I earned that money. I earned every cent for putting up with you. There it was. The truth. The mask was gone completely. Thank you, I said, standing up. That is all I needed to hear. Enjoy your retirement, Cynthia. I hear the state penitentiary has a lovely view of the wall. I hung up the phone and walked away. She was screaming behind the glass, banging her fists against the barrier, mouthing curses. I did not look back. I walked out into the fresh air and felt lighter than I had in years. But the loose end remained. Vance was still out there. That afternoon, I was at the hospital with Leo when my phone rang. It was the lead detective on the case. Mr. Blackwood, he said. We got him. Where, I asked. JFK International Airport, the detective said. He was trying to board a flight to Belize using a fake passport. He bought the ticket with cash he had pawned his watch for. He looked like a wreck. Thank God, I said, letting out a breath I did not know I was holding. Is it over? Not quite. The detective said, his voice serious. We have him in interrogation right now. He is singing like a bird, Mr. Blackwood. He is terrified. He knows Cynthia is going to throw him under the bus, so he is trying to get ahead of it. He is asking for a deal. A deal, I asked. He tried to kill my son. He gets no deal. You might want to hear what he has to say, the detective said. He claims this was not Cynthia's first time. He claims he knows about a skeleton in her closet. A literal one. What are you talking about? Vance told us to look into Cynthia's first husband, the detective said. A man named Robert Miller. He died 15 years ago in Ohio. The cause of death was listed as a heart attack. He was 40 years old. I felt a chill run down my spine. Cynthia had told me her first husband died of a congenital heart defect. She played the tragic widow so well. Vance says Cynthia laughed about it, the detective continued. He says she told him that arsenic is the perfect crime because if you cremate the body, the evidence disappears in the smoke. But Robert Miller was not cremated, Mr. Blackwood. He was buried in a Catholic cemetery. And Vance says if we exhume the body, we will find enough heavy metals in his bones to light up a Geiger counter. I sat down in the hospital chair. The phone felt heavy in my hand. She is not just a thief, I whispered. She is a serial killer. Exactly, the detective said. Vance says she killed Miller for the life insurance. $500,000. That was her seed money. That was how she reinvented herself and moved to Connecticut to find a bigger target. To find you. I looked at Leo sleeping in the bed. He was not just a victim of greed. He was the survivor of a black widow who had been hunting for decades. Get the warrant, I told the detective. Dig him up. We are already on it, the detective said. If Vance is telling the truth, Cynthia is not looking at 20 years for attempted murder. She is looking at the death penalty or life without parole for capital murder in the first degree. I hung up the phone. I looked at my son. I looked at the IV bag of saline dripping clean, pure fluid into his arm. We had escaped a monster who had killed before and would have killed again. The endgame had arrived. and it was going to be more final than Cynthia ever imagined. The detectives moved fast. They secured a warrant to exhume the body of Robert Miller from a cemetery in Ohio within 24 hours of Vance's confession. It was a grim business disturbing the dead, but the dead were the only ones who could speak the truth now. I waited by the phone for 3 days while the state crime lab processed the samples. I spent those days with Leo, watching him get stronger, watching the color return to his cheeks. But the shadow of what Cynthia had done still hung over us. Then the call came. It was the lead detective again. His voice was grim but satisfied. "Vance was telling the truth, Mr. Blackwood. We found massive concentrations of arsenic in the hair and bone marrow samples. Robert Miller did not die of a heart attack. He was murdered. The levels suggest he was poisoned over a period of 6 months. It was a practice run for what she did to your son." That was the final nail in the coffin of Cynthia's defense. The district attorney immediately upgraded the charges. She was no longer just facing attempted murder. She was facing capital murder charges for the death of Robert Miller. In our state, that meant she was looking at life without the possibility of parole or potentially the death penalty. She was a serial predator who had killed for profit. But for me, sending her to prison was not enough. Prison would take her freedom, but it would not restore the years she stole from Leo. It would not pay for the pain. I wanted her to lose everything. I wanted to strip her of every asset, every hiding place, every safety net she had built with her blood money. I wanted to leave her with nothing but the orange jumpsuit on her back. I called Harriet into my office. I told her to activate the nuclear option. We pulled the prenuptial agreement and the trust fund documents. Most people think a prenup just protects what you had before the marriage, but my lawyers are thorough. There was a clause buried deep in the contract called the bad faith and criminal malfeasance clause. It stated that if either spouse committed a felony against the other or their dependents, they forfeited all marital assets, all of them. But Harriet found something even better. She invoked the legal doctrine of constructive trust. Since Cynthia had used stolen money to purchase assets, those assets legally belonged to the victim. They belonged to Leo. We filed a massive civil lawsuit alongside the criminal charges. We went after everything. We targeted her personal savings accounts. We targeted her jewelry collection. We targeted the Porsche she had bought for Vance. But the real blow, the one I knew would destroy her, was yet to come. During the investigation, Harriet had traced a wire transfer of $500,000 from the trust fund 2 years ago. Cynthia had labeled it as a donation to a medical charity. It was a lie. The money had gone to a title company in Ohio. She had bought a large 4-bedroom house in an upscale suburb for her parents. Her parents were retired, living the good life on my son's suffering. They drove new cars and took cruises, all paid for by the slow poisoning of a 19-year-old boy. They likely did not know where the money came from, or maybe they chose not to ask. But ignorance does not protect you when you are living in a house built on crime. We appeared in court for the arraignment on the new murder charges. The atmosphere was electric. The press was packed into the gallery. Cynthia was brought in shackled at the waist and ankles. She looked haggard. The reality of the death penalty hanging over her head had finally broken her composure. The judge read the new charges. Murder in the first degree. Insurance fraud. Cynthia stood there trembling, silently crying. She looked at her lawyer, a public defender this time, since her assets were frozen, and she could not afford private counsel. Then it was our turn. Harriet stood up and addressed the court regarding the civil seizure of assets. "Your Honor," Harriet said, her voice ringing clear, "we are filing a motion for immediate asset forfeiture and restitution. We have traced the funds stolen from Leo Blackwood's trust. These funds were used to purchase real estate in Ohio, specifically the residence located at 42 Maple Drive, currently occupied by the defendant's parents." Cynthia's head snapped up. For the first time, she looked truly terrified. Not for herself, but for the image she had built. "No," she whispered. "Leave them out of this." "They did not do anything." Harriet ignored her. Because this property was purchased entirely with the proceeds of embezzlement and fraud. It is subject to immediate seizure. Harriet continued. We have already served the eviction notice, Your Honor. The occupants have been given 48 hours to vacate the premises before the locks are changed and the property is liquidated to pay for Mr. Leo Blackwood's medical recovery. The courtroom went silent. This was ruthless. This was total war. Cynthia lunged against her restraints. The chains rattled loudly. You cannot do that, she screamed, her voice raw and desperate. My father is sick. They have nowhere to go. That is their home. Harrison, please do not do this. Take the cars. Take the jewelry. Do not throw my parents on the street. I stood up slowly. I looked her in the eye. I wanted her to know exactly why this was happening. It is not their home, Cynthia, I said, my voice calm and cold. It is Leo's house. You bought it with his life. You bought it by stopping his heart. You bought it by making him crawl on the floor, begging for water. She was sobbing now, hysterical, shaking her head back and forth. They are innocent, she wailed. They are old people. My son was innocent too, I said, and you did not care. You sacrificed him for money. Now the money is gone, and your parents are going to learn exactly what kind of daughter they raised. I leaned in closer so only she could hear the final twisting of the knife. I spoke to your father this morning, Cynthia. I told him everything. I sent him the video. I showed him what you did to buy that house. Her eyes went wide with horror. He hung up on me, I said. But before he did, he told me he has no daughter. He said he would rather live in a shelter than spend one more night under a roof paid for by a murderer. He is leaving the keys on the counter. They are disowning you, Cynthia. You have no money. You have no freedom. And now you have no family. That was the breaking point. Cynthia threw her head back and let out a scream that sounded like a soul being torn in half. It was a primal sound of absolute loss. She collapsed to the floor, her legs giving out under the weight of her own destruction. She wailed, thrashing against the floor, screaming for her mother, screaming for forgiveness, screaming at the God she had ignored for so long. The bailiffs moved in to pick her up. They dragged her out of the courtroom, her feet dragging on the floor, her screams echoing down the hallway long after she was gone. I watched her go. I felt no joy. I felt no satisfaction. I just felt a heavy finality. The debt had been paid. The balance had been restored. She had tried to take my family from me, so I had taken hers from her. I turned to Harriet. She looked shaken by the intensity of the scene, but she nodded at me. It is done, she said. The assets are being transferred back to the trust. The house in Florida, the house in Ohio, the accounts in Cayman. We got it all back, Harrison. Every cent. Thank you, Harriet, I said. I walked out of the courtroom. The reporters were shouting questions, but I did not hear them. I walked out into the bright afternoon sun. I took a deep breath of fresh air. It tasted clean. I got into my car and drove to the hospital. Leo was waiting. He was sitting up in bed eating real food for the first time in months. His color was better. He smiled when I walked in. Is it over, Dad? He asked. I sat down beside him and took his hand. His grip was stronger today. Yes, son, I said. It is over. She can never hurt us again. She has nothing left. Leo nodded. He did not ask for details. He did not need to know about the house in Ohio or the screams in the courtroom. He just needed to know that the monster was gone. We sat there in silence, watching the sun go down through the hospital window. We had scars, both of us. But we also had the future. And for the first time in 2 years, the future looked bright. The leaves outside the window have turned from green to a brilliant gold. It has been 6 months since the gavel fell in that courtroom, but looking at my life now, it feels like a lifetime ago. The silence in my house is no longer the silence of a tomb. It is the peaceful silence of a home that has been cleansed. I sat on the back porch watching a young man jogging up the long driveway. He was moving with a steady rhythmic gait, his breath pluming in the crisp autumn air. He was not fast, not yet, but he was moving under his own power. Leo stopped at the bottom of the stairs, hands on his knees, catching his breath. He looked up at me and grinned. It was a smile that reached his eyes. His hair had grown back thick and dark, covering the scalp that had once been bare from poison. His cheeks were full, flushed with exertion and health. He had gained 30 pounds since the day we left the hospital. The hollowed-out skeleton that Cynthia had created was gone, replaced by the resilience of youth. "I beat my time, Dad," Leo called out. 2 miles in 20 minutes. I stood up and poured him a glass of lemonade. "Next week it will be 3 miles, I said, handing him the glass. "Just do not push it. We have time." Leo sat down on the step, wiping sweat from his forehead. He looked at his legs. "I know," he said. "Dr. Aris says my nerve function is almost 100%. I might even get back in the pool by spring." But swimming was not the only thing on his mind anymore. Later that afternoon, we sat in my study. The room used to be a place where I hid from my unhappiness. Now it was a place of business, but not the business of architecture. "I have made a decision," Leo said, placing a college application on my desk. "I am not going back to the engineering program." I looked at the paperwork. He had filled out a transfer request to the pre-law program at the university. "Law?" I asked. "Why law?" Leo looked out the window toward the city skyline. "Because of what happened in that courtroom," he said. "Because of what Harriet did. Because of what the judge did. Dad, there are people out there who do not have a father like you. People who are trapped. People who are sick and scared and have nobody to speak for them. I want to be the one who speaks. I want to be the one who puts monsters like Cynthia away." I looked at my son, and I felt a pride so intense it almost hurt. Cynthia had tried to destroy him. She had tried to turn him into a victim. Instead, she had forged him into a warrior. She had given him a purpose. I signed the transfer papers as his guarantor. "You will be a hell of a lawyer, Leo," I said. "Just promise me one thing." "Anything, Dad." "Promise me you will always trust your gut," I said. "If something feels wrong, it is wrong. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise." "I promise," he said. My own life had changed too. I was no longer the tired 70-year-old man who just wanted to nap the afternoon away. I had energy. I had a mission. Using a portion of the recovered funds from the seizure of Cynthia's assets, I had established a new organization, the Leo Blackwood Foundation for Victims of Medical Fraud and Domestic Abuse. We hired private investigators and forensic accountants to help families who suspected their loved ones were being exploited. Harriet had come on board as a consultant. We had already taken 3 cases. We were saving lives. I was building something far more important than skyscrapers. I was building a legacy of protection. That evening, the air turned cold. I built a fire in the living room hearth. The crackle of the wood was a comforting sound. Leo sat in the armchair, reading a thick textbook on constitutional law. I sat opposite him with a book of my own, but I was not reading. I was watching him. I was savoring the simple miracle of his presence. 6 months ago, I thought I would be visiting his grave. Today, I was watching him study for a future he almost did not have. The news was playing softly in the background. The reporter was recapping the sentencing phase of a high-profile case. Cynthia and Thomas Vance had been sentenced earlier that day. Life in prison without the possibility of parole for 2 counts of capital murder and attempted murder. The judge had called them predators of the worst kind. Leo looked up at the screen for a moment, then looked back at his book. He did not say anything. He did not need to. They were the past. We were the present. "There is one last thing I need to do," I said, standing up. Leo looked at me. "What is it?" I walked over to the mantel. Tucked behind a clock was a photograph. It was the official wedding portrait of me and Cynthia taken 10 years ago. We were standing on a beach smiling. She looked beautiful. I looked happy. It was a lie. A printed, framed lie. I had kept it not out of nostalgia, but as a reminder. A reminder of how easily I had been fooled. A reminder of the woman who had slept beside me while plotting to kill my flesh and blood. I took the photo out of the frame. The glossy paper felt cold in my hand. Leo watched me. He put his book down. "Do you hate her, Dad?" he asked quietly. I looked at the woman in the photo. I looked at the eyes that I once thought were full of love. "I do not hate her," I said. "Hate takes energy, Leo, and she does not deserve my energy anymore. She is nothing to me. She is a ghost. She is a lesson." I walked to the fireplace. The flames were dancing orange and yellow, hungry and purifying. I tossed the photograph into the fire. It landed face up. For a second, Cynthia's smile seemed to flicker in the heat. Then the edges curled. The paper blackened. The image bubbled and melted. In seconds she was gone, turned to ash, and smoke sucked up the chimney and dispersed into the cold night air. I watched until there was nothing left but gray dust. I turned back to my son. "It is done," I said. Leo smiled. "It is done." I poured myself a glass of water and sat back down. The house was warm. The doors were locked. The cameras were gone because we did not need them anymore. We had the truth. People say love is blind. They say it makes you ignore the red flags. They say it makes you weak. And for a long time they were right about me. I was blind. I was weak. I let a monster into our home because I wanted to be loved. But there is another kind of love. A love that is not blind. A love that sees everything. The love of a father for his son. That love opened my eyes. That love gave me the strength to lie, to spy, and to fight. I looked at Leo turning the page of his book, safe and alive. Sometimes to protect the things you love, you have to shed your humanity. You have to stop being the nice guy. You have to stop being the victim. You have to become something colder, something harder. You have to become a monster to defeat a monster. And looking at my son living his life, I knew one thing for certain. I would do it all again. Harrison's story serves as a chilling reminder that love should never be blind. Sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one sleeping beside you. The greatest lesson here isn't about paranoia, but about the responsibility to protect. When your gut screams that something is wrong, never silence it for the sake of keeping the peace. To save those we cherish, good people must sometimes shed their gentleness to become sharper and more ruthless than the villains they face. A devastating truth, no matter how painful, is always infinitely better than a comforting lie. What are your thoughts on Harrison's ultimate revenge? Did he go too far by destroying Cynthia's family, or was it the perfect justice for a monster? Let me know your opinion in the comments below. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you never miss the next truth-exposing drama.